CBS News has learned new forensic evidence appears to contradict Brian Hooker's account of where he says he was the night his wife Lynette went missing in the Bahamas.
On the night of April 4th, 2026, the pitch-black waters of the Sea of Abaco swallowed a secret. Out in the darkness, miles from the nearest Bahamian shore, a frantic voice cut through the marine radio static, screaming that a wave had just snatched a 55-year-old woman into the sea. But as the engine sputtered out and the silence of the ocean settled in, a terrifying 9-hour countdown began. What the emergency teams did not know as they raced into the dark was that the woman's husband was about to hand them a story that defied the laws of physics, and a digital trail was already recording a completely different, sinister reality. For over a decade, the names Lynette and Brian Hooker were synonymous with the ultimate American escape. To their thousands of subscribers online, they were the couple who successfully broke the chains of the mainland grid. They sold their possessions in Michigan, stepped from the traditional American hustle, and took to the open sea aboard Soulmate, their beautiful primary yacht. They documented everything, every sunset, every hidden cove, every tropical storm. They cultivated a community of viewers who envied their nomadic, seemingly perfect lifestyle. They were two souls against the world, navigating the globe together. But the polished reality of social media has a habit of masking deep, systemic fractures. Behind the high-definition videos and the sun-kissed smiles lay a history that the cameras never captured. And on that warm April evening in the Abaco Islands, the ultimate maritime dream was about to collide with a violent, unfolding nightmare. Before we drop anchor into the dark details of this unfolding mystery and look at the evidence that changed everything, I want to know who is out there navigating these waters with us tonight. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? And what is the weather like outside your window right now? Drop your location and time in the comments below. I read every single one of your responses, and it helps our community grow. If you are fascinated by the psychological depths of true crime and want to follow this investigation as the federal government prepares its case, take a second right now to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. By joining the Crime Cortex crew, you ensure you will never miss a single breakdown as we uncover the truth behind the world's most baffling cases. Now, let us return to the night where everything fell apart. To understand the sheer scale of the mystery unfolding in the Sea of Abaco, we have to look closely at the final timeline of April 4th, 2026. The setting is Hopetown, a historic village nestled on Elbow Cay. It is a place known for its iconic candy-striped lighthouse, its narrow golf cart-only streets, and a relaxed maritime culture that draws sailors from every corner of the United States. On this particular Saturday evening, the atmosphere felt entirely normal. Eyewitnesses at a popular local waterfront establishment reported seeing Lynette and Brian Hooker dining together. To anyone glancing over from a neighboring table, they appeared to be just another pair of retired American cruisers enjoying a warm island night. They shared a meal, paid their bill, and prepared to make the journey back to their floating home. Soulmate, their primary yacht, was anchored out in the deeper, protected waters of the harbor. Because a massive sailboat cannot simply pull up to a shallow dock, the couple relied on their secondary vessel for shore transits, a small, 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy equipped with a modest outboard motor. As they walked down to the dock just before sundown, the tropical twilight was fading fast. The Caribbean night does not linger. Once the sun drops below the horizon, total darkness blankets the water almost instantly. The wind was beginning to pick up, creating choppy, unpredictable conditions across the bay. According to the official statements Brian Hooker later provided to the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the couple climbed into the 8-foot dinghy and pushed off from the safety of the Hopetown dock. Brian took his place at the stern to operate the outboard motor, while Lynette sat toward the bow. They set a course through the dark toward Aunt Pat's Bay, navigating a stretch of water notorious for its shifting currents. It was during this short, routine transit that Brian claims disaster struck. In his account to detectives, Brian stated that the small dinghy was suddenly blindsided by a massive, rogue surge of water. The vessel rocked violently, and within a fraction of a second, 55-year-old Lynette was thrown completely over the side, plunging into the Black Sea. Now, in any standard boating emergency involving a couple, the operator immediately circles the vessel back to rescue the swimmer. But Brian handed investigators a highly specific mechanical explanation for why he could not do that. He claimed that Lynette had the dinghy's plastic engine safety lanyard wrapped around her wrist or attached to her life vest. The safety lanyard is a crucial piece of maritime gear. It connects the boat's ignition directly to the operator. So if the driver falls overboard, the clip pulls away and instantly kills the engine to prevent the boat from running over them. According to Brian, when Lynette went over the side, the lanyard ripped out of the ignition with her. The outboard motor cut out instantly. The dinghy went completely dead in the water. Brian told local authorities that through the gloom, he could see Lynette actively swimming, making a desperate attempt to head toward the nearest shoreline of Elbow Cay. He claimed he screamed out to her, trying to maintain visual contact, but the combination of howling winds and a powerful, blinding current rapidly drove their unpowered vessels apart. Within minutes, the darkness swallowed her completely, leaving Brian alone on a dead boat, drifting into the open sea. It is a tragic, harrowing sequence of events, a textbook maritime accident born from bad luck and rough weather. But when ocean safety experts and seasoned Bahamian captains heard Brian's description of the accident, a collective wave of skepticism rippled through the community. You see, a captain always wears the kill switch. The physics of his story did not just raise eyebrows. They challenged everything investigators knew about standard operating procedures on the water. And as the hours began to tick away in total silence, the line between a tragic accident and something far more calculated began to blur. When a human being falls into the ocean in the middle of the night, every single second dictates the boundary between survival and tragedy. The human body can only fight the pull of a dark, rolling current for so long before exhaustion sets in. In the maritime world, an immediate distress call is the absolute baseline of survival protocol. Yet, on the night of April 4th, 2026, the clock kept ticking in absolute silence. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 5. According to the official timeline established by law enforcement, Lynette went over the side of the small dinghy just before sundown, around 7 o'clock in the evening. But emergency personnel in the Abaco Islands did not receive a single radio transmission, a distress flare, or a phone call during the peak hours of the crisis. Instead, a massive 9-hour void settled over the Sea of Abaco. Brian Hooker would later explain this agonizing delay by describing a brutal, exhaustive struggle against the elements. He told detectives that after the engine cut out, he realized he was completely stranded. He did not have a secondary ignition key, and the safety lanyard was gone. Left with no mechanical power, Brian claimed he grabbed the small paddles inside the 8-foot dinghy. He told authorities he fought with everything he had, desperately attempting to row the heavy, hard-bottomed craft against the punishing wind to get back to the last location where he saw his wife swimming. But the environment, he claimed, was entirely unyielding. The fierce winds and the powerful, blinding currents of the bay completely overpowered his physical efforts. Instead of moving toward the shoreline of Elbow Cay, the small boat was swept out into the wide-open, treacherous waters of the Sea of Abaco. For hours, Brian claimed, he drifted through the pitch-black night, completely at the mercy of the tide, miles away from their primary yacht, Soulmate. He maintained that he was entirely isolated, unable to signal for help or navigate his way back to civilization. It was not until the first light of dawn began to crack the horizon on Sunday, April 5th, that the 9-hour drift finally came to an end. The tides had carried the tiny dinghy completely across the bay, miles from the initial incident zone, finally washing ashore near a secluded area of Marsh Harbor. Local workers at a nearby boatyard reported a surreal scene at the start of their morning shift. Brian Hooker emerged from the dense, tangled coastal underbrush lining the shore. He was visibly exhausted, disheveled, and distraught. He approached the workers, delivering the stunning announcement that his wife had been lost at sea nearly 9 hours prior. The boatyard staff immediately contacted emergency services, triggering a massive wave of flashing lights as local police and medical teams rushed to the scene. Brian was taken in for immediate questioning and medical evaluation, while a frantic, delayed rescue operation was thrown into motion. To the locals who first encountered Brian that morning, his exhaustion appeared entirely consistent with a man who had just survived a terrifying night adrift on the ocean. His story was detailed, emotionally charged, and filled with the terrifying logistics of a maritime disaster. But as seasoned detectives from the Royal Bahamas police force began to plot Brian's claimed route on a nautical chart, the math simply did not add up. To drift from Aunt Pat's Bay all the way to that specific boatyard in Marsh Harbor under those exact wind conditions required a very specific set of physics. And when investigators began looking into what Brian did the very moment he stepped onto dry land, the structural integrity of his timeline began to fracture, exposing a terrifying question. Was Brian drifting at the mercy of the ocean, or was he carefully managing the clock? The moment the emergency call cleared the boatyard in Marsh Harbor, an international rescue machinery roared to life. This was not a standard missing persons report. It involved an American citizen lost in foreign waters, meaning the response required absolute, seamless cooperation between two nations. Within the hour, a massive joint task force was established. The Royal Bahamas Police Force and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force deployed marine assets to blanket the coastlines. Simultaneously, the United States Coast Guard sent manned aircraft and high-altitude helicopters from their stations in Florida, slicing through the Caribbean skies to coordinate an aerial grid search. On the water, the local community refused to stand by. The Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue Team, consisting of seasoned local captains who knew every reef and hidden current in the Abaco Islands, launched their own fleet. Deepwater divers surged into the reefs around Aunt Pat's Bay, navigating the sharp coral shelves where a swimmer might have sought refuge. Advanced aerial drone technology was deployed to scan the shallow flats and dense mangrove shorelines from above. For 4 straight days, from April 5th to April 8th, 2026, the search was relentless. Every square mile of the Sea of Abaco was methodically charted, analyzed, and crossed off the master map. Yet, despite deploying millions of dollars in advanced military and local tracking technology, the ocean yielded absolutely nothing. No life vest, no torn clothing, no personal effects. Not a single physical trace of 55-year-old Lynette Hooker was ever found. On April 8, 2026, a heavy, somber shift occurred. Recognizing that the window for human survival in open water had officially slammed shut, the United States Coast Guard and Bahamian authorities called off the rescue mission. The operation was formally reclassified as a recovery effort. Lynette was now presumed deceased. With the hope of a rescue completely gone, the spotlight of the investigation turned aggressively toward the only surviving witness, Brian Hooker. As detectives began to deconstruct the mechanics of his statement, glaring inconsistencies began to surface. Local boat captains immediately questioned the engine safety lanyard theory. In the maritime community, it is a cardinal rule that the person operating the outboard motor wears the kill switch clip. The idea that Lynette, riding as a passenger in the front of an 8-foot dinghy, was securely wearing the lanyard, while Brian steered from the back, seemed highly unorthodox. Furthermore, oceanographers mapping the tidal data from the night of April 4th realized that an unpowered, drifting object should have moved along a completely different trajectory based on the wind patterns that evening. But the most damaging red flags did not come from the ocean. They came from a deep dive into the couple's past on the American mainland. Homicide detectives contacted local law enforcement agencies in Michigan, requesting a full breakdown of the couple's public records. What they uncovered completely shattered the idyllic image of the peaceful, nomadic YouTube couple. Unsealed police reports from 2015 exposed a volatile, toxic domestic history. According to official records, authorities had been called to the couple's residence multiple times, following intense physical altercations. The documentation detailed mutual allegations of extreme domestic violence, including terrifying descriptions of choking and physical restraint. To the subscribers of the Sailing Hookers, they were a couple living a dream of absolute freedom. But to the detectives reading through the unsealed Michigan files, they were a couple locked in a dangerous, escalating cycle of marital friction. A cycle that had suddenly reached its final, silent conclusion in the deep waters of the Bahamas. The discovery of the domestic violence records changed everything. This was no longer treated as an unfortunate boating mishap. It was now an active homicide investigation. The Royal Bahamas Police Force realized they had a window of opportunity to strike before the primary suspect could leave the country. But as they moved in to make their arrest, they had no idea that a routine piece of police work out on the way open sea was about to take a bizarre, near-fatal turn. Equipped with a volatile domestic history and growing skepticism from maritime experts, the Royal Bahamas Police Force decided they could no longer afford to wait. On April 8, 2026, the very day the search was officially reclassified as a recovery effort, tactical officers closed in. Brian Hooker was intercepted in Freeport, Grand Bahama, miles away from where he had originally stepped out of the underbrush. He was taken into custody under severe suspicion, facing intense interrogation regarding the allegation of causing harm resulting in the death of his wife. Inside the police facilities, Brian remained steadfast. He wept for his missing wife, projecting the image of a broken, grieving husband who had fought the ocean and lost. He maintained that the sea conditions were the sole culprit and that his past marital friction in Michigan had absolutely no bearing on the tragic accident. But Bahamian detectives wanted to see the physics of his story play out in real time. They decided to conduct a standard investigative procedure, a physical reenactment of the night of April 4th, out on the open water. A police vessel was prepared, and a team of investigators escorted Brian out into the choppy waters near the Abaco Islands. His hands were securely bound in steel handcuffs behind his back, a standard safety protocol for a high-profile suspect in custody. The goal was to have Brian walk the detectives through the exact positioning of the dinghy, showing precisely how the wave struck, how Lynette went over the side, and how the safety lanyard was pulled from the ignition. But as the police boat navigated the turbulent swells of the bay, the reenactment took a truly bizarre and dangerous turn. The vessel encountered a series of rough waves, rocking the boat violently. Brian, unable to use his hands to brace himself due to the handcuffs, completely lost his footing. In a split second, the primary suspect tumbled over the gunwale, plunging directly into the deep, rolling sea. For a terrifying moment, panic erupted on the police boat. A heavily built man, handcuffed behind his back, faces an immediate death sentence in deep water. Investigators scrambled to the side of the vessel, throwing life rings and reaching into the surf. Within moments, officers successfully hauled a gasping, waterlogged Brian back onto the deck. While he survived the plunge, the incident left its mark. Brian had sustained a visible, painful injury to his knee during the fall or the subsequent rescue. The moment the boat returned to dry land, Brian's high-profile defense attorney, Terrell Butler, launched a fierce, public offensive against the police department. Butler slammed the authorities for negligence, publicly demanding immediate medical intervention and questioning the safety protocols of the entire investigation. The injury and the media firestorm created a massive legal roadblock for the local government. On April 10, 2026, prosecutors went before a Bahamian magistrate, requesting a formal 72-hour extension to continue holding Brian without a specific charge, while they looked for physical proof. But the legal system is bound by strict timelines. Because search teams had not recovered Lynette's body, and because the forensic processing of the vessels had not yet yielded definitive, undeniable proof of a physical struggle, the legal limit for detention officially expired. On April 13, 2026, the prison doors opened. Brian Hooker walked out of custody a free man. The local authorities were forced to release him, unable to file formal homicide charges at that time. He remained the primary person of interest, but without the physical evidence, the investigation had hit a brick wall. To Brian and his legal team, the release was a massive victory. A sign that the government's case was built on nothing but speculation and circumstantial gossip. Brian was free to move, free to plan his next steps, while the case seemingly grew cold over the next several weeks. But what Brian did not realize was that while he was walking out of that Bahamian police station, a silent, digital witness was being flown across the Atlantic Ocean directly to a high-tech government laboratory in Virginia. And when federal technicians cracked open the encryption on his electronics, they uncovered a digital trail that transformed a stagnant missing persons case into a full-scale federal manhunt. When Brian Hooker walked away from the Bahamian police station in mid-April, he likely believed the ocean had swept away any chance of a prosecution. In a case with no body, no eyewitnesses, and a vast ocean to absorb the secrets of April 4th, securing a conviction is one of the steepest mountains law enforcement can climb. He had survived the interrogation, weathered the boat reenactment, and his legal defense had successfully pushed back against local detention. But as the days stretched into weeks, a silent, parallel operation was unfolding thousands of miles away on American soil. During the initial phase of the investigation, federal agents had quietly exercised their jurisdiction, seizing several electronic communication devices, including smartphones and marine navigation equipment belonging to the couple. Because both Brian and Lynette were United States citizens, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had a direct interest in the case. The seized electronics were packed into secure evidence bags and flown directly to the premier Federal Bureau of Investigation laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. For nearly 2 weeks, digital forensic technicians worked behind closed doors, using advanced data extraction tools to bypass encryption codes and rebuild deleted files. They weren't just looking for text messages or search histories. They were hunting for the raw, unvarnished truth stored within the device's internal location chips. In late May 2026, the laboratory achieved a massive breakthrough. Technicians successfully extracted highly precise positioning data from at least one mobile electronic device that Brian had in his physical possession on the night his wife vanished. When the engineers plotted those coordinates onto a nautical chart, the entire structural foundation of Brian's defense disintegrated. Brian had told the Royal Bahamas Police Force a very specific story. The dinghy lost all mechanical power the exact second Lynette fell overboard because she took the ignition safety lanyard with her. He claimed he was entirely helpless, trapped in an unpowered vessel, drifting passively at the whim of the wind and current for 9 agonizing hours, until he randomly washed ashore in Marsh Harbor. But the digital footprint revealed a completely different reality. The GPS track proved that the device was not drifting aimlessly at all. The data points showed a deliberate, steady path moving across the water at a speed that could only be achieved by a fully operational, powered outboard motor. Most damaging of all, the tracking data revealed that the device traveled out into a specific sector of the Sea of Abaco and came to a complete stop. It lingered at those exact, isolated coordinates for an extended period in the dead of night before restarting its trajectory and navigating back toward the mainland. The digital trail completely shattered the 9-hour passive drift narrative. It strongly suggested a calculated, intentional voyage out into the deeper water, and it handed investigators the exact geographic coordinates of the stop zone. The explosion of this forensic data triggered an immediate escalation from Washington. A senior United States official confirmed to national news agencies that the case was no longer being treated as a routine missing persons inquiry. The United States government officially upgraded the posture, launching a formal federal investigation under a specific, heavy statute: the possible foreign murder of a United States national. The FBI and the United States Coast Guard were no longer just assisting local island authorities. They were now actively constructing a federal homicide case, weaponizing the digital evidence to pull the mystery from the depths of the Caribbean Sea. With the deceptive timeline exposed by the digital forensics, the diplomatic gears turned instantly. The United States government launched a massive, sudden offensive, securing emergency authorization from the Bahamian administration to reclaim the waters of the Abaco Islands. The time for passive interviewing was over. On June 2, 2026, a massive WAS 154-foot military vessel appeared on the horizon of Marsh Harbor, carrying a specialized team of deep-sea divers who were tracking the exact coordinates left behind by Brian's phone. The arrival of the new forensic data completely altered the operational tempo of the investigation. The United States government was no longer waiting for answers from a distance. Armed with the exact coordinates recovered from the digital extraction, federal authorities initiated a highly coordinated, multi-agency offensive that sent shockwaves through the quiet communities of the Abaco Islands. Because the target coordinate zone was situated entirely within Bahamian territorial waters, a complex diplomatic protocol had to be cleared. The United States government successfully secured urgent formal clearance from the Bahamian administration to launch an independent, aggressive recovery operation utilizing United States military assets. On Tuesday, June 2, 2026, residents of Marsh Harbor looked out across the water to see a massive presence anchoring in the bay. The 154-foot United States Coast Guard cutter, Margaret Norville, had arrived on scene. This was not a standard patrol vessel. Margaret Norville was acting as a mobile command fortress, carrying a highly trained elite team of deep-sea Navy and Coast Guard divers. These divers were equipped with advanced underwater scanning technology, sonar arrays, and specialized grid search equipment. Their mission was singular, dangerous, and incredibly precise: to descend into the dark depths of the Sea of Abaco and systematically canvass exact underwater coordinates where Brian's electronic device had lingered for hours on the night of April 4th. By Wednesday, June 3rd, the operation expanded into a simultaneous land and sea assault. While the heavy divers searched the ocean floor, smaller, high-speed Orange Coast Guard dinghies, flanked by vessels from the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, methodically patrolled the shallow inlets and rocky coastlines near the Abaco Inn. This was the last land-based location where Lynette had been seen alive, and investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned. On the shore, the investigation took a deeply visceral turn. Federal authorities deployed specialized canine teams flown in from Florida's Broward County Sheriff's Office. A highly trained, renowned cadaver dog named Maggie was seen pacing the hot sands and dense, tangled underbrush of Hopetown on Elbow Cay. Her handlers guided her along the edge of the water, watching her body language intently for any signature alerts that would indicate the presence of human decomposition along the coastal tree line. As the ground and sea teams combed the geography, forensic technicians moved in on the physical assets. Federal authorities officially took physical possession of both vessels involved in the case: the primary luxury yacht, Soulmate, and the small, 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy. Both watercraft were hauled into secure, temperature-controlled environments to undergo exhaustive forensic processing. Teams utilized high-intensity lights and chemical sprays to scan every square inch of the fiberglass hulls, hunting for trace evidence, blood spatter, or any hidden indicators of a physical struggle. Simultaneously, its investigators were working to ensure that if the deep-sea divers or the K-9 teams located human remains, The identification process would be instantaneous. Federal agents reached out directly to Lynette's biological family in the United States. Her adult daughter, Carly Aylesworth, alongside Lynette's elderly parents, voluntarily submitted biological reference material. Technicians collected genetic mouth swabs from the family members, rushing the samples to the federal laboratories to map out a definitive DNA profile. The strategy was clear. The government was building an ironclad framework. They had the digital path, they had the forensic search teams, and they had the family DNA standing by. Every single piece of the investigative machinery was moving in perfect unison, closing the distance around a mystery that had spent 2 months hiding beneath the waves. The sheer scale of the June offensive made one thing completely undeniable. The federal government was no longer treating this as a search for a missing person. They were searching for a body, and they were hunting a killer. But as the Coast Guard cutter, Margaret Norvell, began lowering its divers into the water, a new, alarming variable entered the equation. The primary suspect, who had been vocal about his innocence just weeks prior, looked at the arriving warships and made a choice that flipped the entire investigation on its head. As the massive multi-agency offensive took over the Sea of Abaco in June 2026, a completely new crisis point emerged for law enforcement. While deep-sea divers descended onto the forensic coordinates and cadaver dogs tracked the coastlines near the Abaco Inn, the central figure of the investigation made a calculated decision to shift the geography of the entire case. Following his release from Bahamian custody in April, Brian Hooker had initially maintained a public stance of profound grief and total innocence. He spoke to friends through digital messaging, reiterating his narrative that the unpredictable ocean currents had stolen his beloved wife and that he had nearly lost his own life attempting to paddle back to her. He returned to the United States, keeping a relatively low profile while his legal defense teams managed the public fallout. But the moment the forensic breakthrough from the Quantico laboratory became public knowledge, everything changed. Brian realized that the silent electronic witness in his pocket had completely betrayed him. The federal government was no longer investigating a tragic boating accident. They were assembling a major case for the foreign murder of a United States national. With the military-grade hull of the Margaret Norvell anchoring in Marsh Harbor, Brian Hooker vanished. In early June 2026, close associates and friends of Brian dropped a massive bombshell to investigative media outlets. According to a source claiming to be an intimate confidant, Brian had allegedly fled the jurisdiction of the United States entirely. The source indicated that Brian had made a desperate run for the southwest border, utilizing the California-Mexico line to escape the immediate reach of federal prosecutors. To a standard fugitive, crossing an international border undetected presents immense logistical hurdles. But Brian Hooker was not an amateur traveler. He possessed decades of elite maritime navigation skills, an intimate knowledge of coastal waterways, and extensive experience managing vessels across vast distances. Intelligence suggests he may have used a discreet, undocumented water route or a quiet land crossing to slip past the border checkpoints and blend into the vast expanse of Mexico. The revelation of his flight sent a shockwave through true crime communities and legal circles alike. Former federal prosecutors and maritime bounty hunters immediately began debating his chances of survival on the run. Critics lashed out at local authorities for allowing a primary suspect in a potential maritime homicide to leave custody in April and slip through the net entirely. However, seasoned special agents point out a very different reality. While Brian may believe he has successfully outrun the law by crossing the border, federal homicide investigators rarely lose sight of a primary target in a case of this magnitude. Due to the high-profile nature of the investigation, agencies like the FBI likely have his electronic footprint heavily monitored, keeping tabs on his movements through international financial networks and intelligence sharing. Legal experts suggest that the federal government is deliberately biding its time, In a case without a body, prosecutors want their evidence to be completely bulletproof before they unseal an indictment. They are waiting for the elite dive teams in the Bahamas to pull the definitive, undeniable physical evidence from the ocean floor. Evidence that will immediately trigger an international arrest warrant and an inescapable extradition process. The story of Lynette Hooker began as a beautiful dream of open sea freedom, only to end in a labyrinth of digital lies, hidden violence, and an international hunt for justice. The turquoise waters of the Bahamas are incredibly deep, but as technology and federal determination converge, the truth is finally rising to the surface. The digital trail proves that the boat never drifted. It was guided. What do you think Brian was doing at those exact, hidden coordinates in the dead of night? And do you think his elite sailing skills will allow him to evade the federal government? Or is it only a matter of time before the ocean floor yields its final secret? Drop your thoughts, your theories, and your analysis in the comments below. Let us keep the discussion active and ensure that Lynette's name is never forgotten. If you found this investigative breakdown compelling, make sure to smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow true crime enthusiasts, and subscribe to Crime Cortex. By sharing these stories, you help us keep the spotlight exactly where it belongs, on the pursuit of truth and justice. Thank you for watching, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next case.